Zaid Jilani of The Intercept has a great piece on money and politics that I wanted to share with you. So it's a very illuminating article. Here's the headline. 2020 Democratic contenders are making the cheap gesture of swearing off corporate PAC money, but big checks are still flying. So this is interesting because he's going to give us some facts here that are really important. And then there's a difficult conversation to be had about exactly how we interpret those facts and what we do with that information. So look at this. Cory Booker, 10.37% of Booker's campaign funding has come from PACs. Only 10%. 76.4% is from business PACs. By contrast, 72.12% of Booker's campaign funding is from large individual donors. Maria Cantwell, just 0.62% of Cantwell's campaign funding has come from PACs of any kind. In contrast, 73.61% of her campaign funding has come from large donors. Kirsten Gillibrand, 6.95% of Gillibrand's campaign funding has come from PACs. Of this proportion, 65.73% is from business PACs. Meanwhile, 62.15% of her fundraising has come from large individual donors. By the way, these are all people who said they gave up corporate PAC money. Kamala Harris, 4.89% of Harris's campaign fundraising has been through PACs. 41.07% of this total has been from business PACs. By contrast, 64.99% of her campaign funding has come from large donors, though the Open Secrets analysis, which this is taken from, covered a 5-year period. In Harris's case, it only goes back to 2015 when she first ran for U.S. Senate. Bernie Sanders, just 1.73% of his funding has come from PACs. Of that, 7.27% is from business PACs. 17.70% of his funding has come from large individual contributors. Elizabeth Warren, just 1.4% of Warren's campaign money has come from PACs. Of that, 12.91% is from business PACs. Large individual donors make up 29.72% of her campaign funding. So as you can see here, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders are the most pure when it comes to money in politics, because most of their money is from small individual donors. Now, what Zaid Jilani is pointing out here is it's possible for a politician to do the right thing in that they say, we're not going to take corporate PAC money anymore. But at the same time, it's not like they're totally uncorrupted as a result of not taking corporate PAC money anymore, because many of these politicians still get large individual donations. And when you have large donations, that means it's basically rich people giving you a lot of money, and then you're still expected to do the bidding of those rich people. Now, when it comes in the form of corporate PAC money, there's even more of a quid pro quo that's entailed in that. But this raises the question of what's acceptable. Like, what forms of raising money are okay? Because the facts of the matter as they exist right now are you simply cannot win if you have no money. It's just not possible. So you have to raise money somehow. But what ways are acceptable, what ways are not acceptable? Well, what we're seeing here is a consensus that's beginning to bloom that corporate PAC money is not acceptable at all. And now even many corporate Democrats are like, yeah, I'll give up the corporate PAC money. Fine. So that's good, but that's not the end-all be-all. So we should give credit where it's due because people deserve credit for giving up corporate PAC money, but that's not the end-all be-all. So here's where the real question lies in my mind. If I'm not mistaken, I think Open Secrets and The Intercept here are defining large individual donations as anything above $200. So the limit's, I think, $2,700, but they're saying anything that's $200 and above, so anything from $2,000 to $2,700, that's considered a large individual donation. And honestly, The Onion mocked this not that long ago because there were arguments made against Bernie Sanders. There were obviously hacky arguments that were a smear, really, not even an argument, where, you know, people were saying, he takes money from big money donors too. Well, not really. And they were like, well, you took $300 from a teacher. Well, technically, according to the definitions, that is a large individual contribution because it's over $200. But there's no comparison between Bernie taking $300 from a teacher and, you know, some CEO of a Wall Street firm giving $2,700 to Cory Booker. Those things are not remotely similar. So then how do we really define this stuff? Well, listen, there's only one answer that really fixes everything. And the answer that fixes everything is totally ban private donations and do clean elections by law. And there's various ways to do clean election systems, but, one of the ways would be you give every citizen like $100 or $200 to spend on the election, and they allocate it however they deem appropriate. So instead of having private donations for elections and having a $2,700 cap, that's really not equal, because there's going to be a CEO who gives $2,700, but there's also going to be a grandma in Cleveland who can only afford $7. So you do like a tax credit to everybody in the country where they get $200 to spend on an election, but they have to spend it on the election, not allowed to spend it on anything else, and then they pick how they allocate it and who they give it to. I mean, that's one way to do clean elections. But basically, you have to ban private money, because as long as you have private money in the system and it's not publicly financed, there's always going to be a way, no matter how good the rules are, there's always going to be a way around the rules. And so what we're seeing is people like Cory Booker and Kamala Harris and Kirsten Gillibrand, they're giving up corporate PAC money, which is good. But then what they do is a lot of their money, and I just told you the exact numbers here, they'll raise the money through these big dinner parties where they invite really rich and powerful people, and it's like $2,700 a plate. And then that's another way of getting the same kind of corruption or similar corruption as the corporate PAC money. The same kind of inherent quid pro quo. Like if you take money in corporate PAC money, definite quid pro quo that's unspoken. But if you have a dinner where you invite everybody from JP Morgan Chase, and then it's $2,700 a plate, well, at the end of the day, you're going to end up doing the bidding of JP Morgan Chase. So what's the answer? I mean, listen, before we get to a publicly financed system, because we're nowhere near that, what we need is a constitutional amendment to get private money out of the system, do publicly financed elections. But outside of that, we just need to try to make politicians only take small individual donations. But then again, the question comes, how do you define small? So, they spoke to some political science experts about this and campaign finance experts, and basically what they said is, it's basically a cheap gesture to stop taking corporate PAC money, even though it's a good thing. But if you really want them to be less beholden to whatever the donor's interests are, they should have a limit. They should come up with a personal limit that's below the legal limit. So, hey, the most I'll take from anybody is $500, And so individuals donate, and they have to give less than $500. They don't accept a $1,000 or $2,700 donation or whatever it is. But to me, I'm not even sure that's the best way to approach this. To me, I think we should ask for, don't take any corporate PAC money, but also don't have any big donor cocktail party elite fundraisers, where it's like you invite people who are from the for-profit health insurance industry or Wall Street or the military industrial complex, and you sit around and you take money from them because then your policies are going to reflect their interests. So in other words, you really, as much as possible, you want to raise money from regular people. You want to raise money from construction workers and teachers and accountants and doctors, and because then you're going to represent their interests. So you just have to try to get as close to that ideal as you can while still being viable. Like, I prefer politicians who raise money through small dollar contributions. I can accept some big contributions of $500, $1,000, even $2,700, as long as it's not at these dinner parties where there's corruption going on behind the scenes, okay? So ideally small contributors, definitely no corporate PAC money, and the ultimate test, though, is to just keep checking their voting record, because you'll know if they're a good politician based on the voting record. So in other words, even with Bernie, they say, what do they say? 17.70% of his funding has come from large individual contributions. That's better than anybody else. The closest one is, I think, Elizabeth Warren at 29%. Okay? And they happen to be the number one and number two best politicians in the country. So do I think that 17% is corrupt that Bernie takes it? No, I think it's, like I said, it's a teacher who gave him $300, and that counts as a large individual contribution. I'm fine with that. So the ideal is just get as close to small contributions as possible, they should stop taking corporate PAC money and stop taking money at these large gatherings of donors where they're elites and you're expected to represent them, and just keep checking the voting record, because the voting record will tell you really why they're voting how they're voting. And if they have a good voting record, then the way they take money is basically not an issue, or it shouldn't concern you as much if their voting record matches up properly with what our values are.